look, 2 new Castle Nathria card reveals. This is Stag Charge and Wild Spirits. These just got revealed just a few minutes ago, and I wanted to toss them into this video so you guys can check them out. I'll save these for a full review tomorrow morning. 2 cards that aren't legendaries didn't seem quite worth it, but I wanted to get them into this video anyway to get some news alongside the Iksar AMA. So we're going to talk about some cool answers from Hearthstone's game director regarding all kinds of future expansion stuff and how locations were made and so on. But in the meantime, this is Stag Charge and Wild Spirits, each of which summon the WILDSEEDs. You guys might remember these cards from a previous reveal. There's 3 different minions that can be summoned. They're dormant for different durations, and they have some pretty sick effects, actually. And this is a way to get more WILDSEEDs, summon them faster, and get a bunch of them with Wild Spirits in particular. This looks like it's shaping up to be a really cool deck. So want to share these cards with you, but for now, let's jump into some of the Iksar AMA questions and answers and some insights into the world of Hearthstone game development. Here's a question from Ridiculous Hat. Concern that's come up in some circles is the rate of meta churn and change, especially with this expansion between 23.22 and .6. There were 36 new cards and 32 changes in 40 days. Do you have opinions on this cadence? Consider it an issue and or have plans to fix? So basically nowadays we have balance changes, we have mini sets, we have more balance changes, we have early releases of things like Prince Ridithal, all of which can be pretty disruptive to the meta. I think Hat's concerns here are probably in line with people who have 2 issues, like kind of keeping up from a competitive standpoint, like, oh, the meta is always changing, I can't find a good deck, I can't get in a rhythm or climb because my deck's always changing, the decks I'm playing against are always changing. And also from a economy standpoint, as decks and metas change, it demands you have more cards and options to more decks. So sometimes having too many changes can be an issue for certain segments of the population. Iksar response, we're definitely in a new world. We used to view card changes as a negative thing we'd only do when the positive was so great it outweighed the negative change. These days, I'd say the negative of card changes is viewed as a very minor thing. So in other words, they're a little bit more ready to change, nerf, and buff cards. My take on this is I like changes. They're really good for me as a content creator. Obviously, the more new stuff is happening, the more new videos I can make and, you know, new decks to spotlight and new things to talk about. So from a personal standpoint, I like a lot of changes. If it were up to me, they'd release a new expansion every week. You know, I have ridiculous videos. But of course, I understand the sort of fatigue here too. I'm curious what you guys think. Do you wish there were like more changes, less changes? Is this cadence a pretty good spot? I will say for you all watching, you're probably a more engaged audience. You're more likely to have, especially those of you on Twitch, probably more likely to be able to adapt to these sorts of changes sooner. But I bet there are a lot of people out there who do feel like it's hard to keep up, both mentally, strategically, but also you know, financially. You have to buy more cards, get more cards to keep up. That is interesting. Like standard gets a lot of changes these days. It feels like there are usually pretty quick turnarounds on standard changes, but duels has been haunted by Druid now with Twig and Mycelium. It seems like forever. I don't know what the actual timeline is, but it feels like it's been so long since duels has had changes. So I wonder if there is some mode differences here that are important. I've always said I think the biggest issue here for me is the lack of flexibility. They don't have the granular control to manipulate things when they need to happen. They always happen at preset intervals of like, this is when we have a patch scheduled, so this is when changes happen, this is when new cards are introduced. And I know that there are obvious technical limitations there. There's reasons for that. It's a lot of work to ship a patch. I'm not saying that it's wrong to have done it this way, but the result is sometimes changes happen when we don't need them, and other times we don't get changes when we do, perhaps especially in other game modes. But I feel like the mini set came out like a week after some balance changes recently, and we were all like, man, we just barely had that balance change meta. And then the mini set's out, I don't know if it was a week, maybe like 10 days later, it's like, boom, already a new meta. Those kind of rhythms probably feel worse, whereas if they had full control, they could update all of this on the fly when they wanted to, as opposed to patch release schedules, would probably feel a lot more organic and well fitted. All right, here's some good questions from Ben Hearthstone. Great Twitter account. Everybody go follow it. How's your role changed as game director? How do you evaluate success of each game mode? When will we see a new Tavern Brawl? So number one, more future planning stuff in the next 1 to 3 years and less stuff right now. So game directors are less about like day-to-day design and more about overarching plans and higher level data and you know, deciding kind of the macro direction of the game more so than the day-to-day micro stuff. How do you evaluate success? A lot of that is data. Are players playing this mode less or more than they did previously? Do our consumer surveys say players love this mode? Does this mode generate revenue? I wonder how much they rely on this. I would think data would answer a lot of these questions, but there could be things clouding the data that are harder to capture quantitatively, where having some qualitative data with surveys and such can help fill in those gaps. But I'm sure there are smart people balancing those questions. Okay, once we understand those questions, we still have to make a decision on how to support. That question usually isn't whether we should support something or not. It's whether the talented people supporting that thing could be better utilized elsewhere or not. So all about opportunity cost here. If people are working on tavern brawls, can they work on duels? Would they be better suited to work on duels? Yes. 3, I honestly don't know. That's in regards to a new tavern brawl. Tavern brawl is a good example of something we pumped the brakes on. Pumped to use that time elsewhere. Things like duels. Yes. Book of X content, more new stuff in dev. Ooh, spicy. More new stuff in dev. Matt London, another dev here who's working on the mode stuff, says we are in development on new tavern brawls. I think they're focused on duels a little bit because Matt was asking about duels today in a separate tweet thread, like what we'd like to see in the future of duels as a game mode. So that's pretty intriguing. Okay, this is a really good question, I think. How do you feel about the current systems in place in onboarding new players and retaining them? Bad. I like how transparent it is. It's bad. We're currently working on forming a small team to tackle onboarding and win back experiences. What we have isn't good enough. I've always thought Hearthstone's like initial tutorials pretty good, but even now you've got other game modes and stuff you want to point people to for tutorials. It shouldn't really railroad them down to just the one tutorial, perhaps. They're thinking about those sorts of things. But anyway, good to know that this is always a thought. I think right now in particular is a really good time to win people back to Hearthstone. I've noticed a lot of hype around this expansion theme. People really seem intrigued. I hope a lot of people don't come back and have a bad experience. I hope they don't like hit a wall right when they return to the game. All right, how's progress going for your list? This is an old list Iksar posted a while ago about like features he'd like to undertake. So big, crazy, massive features, large features, medium features, small, and other considerations. I don't want to run through all these because this is old, but he says pretty good, actually. That's awesome. Or close to release, but definitely working on things from this list. These big, long ellipses, man, these 5-period ellipses really get me thinking. Like, does that mean one of the bigger things has been tackled? Or tournaments on the way? I would like guild stuff. I think like that'd be awesome. I know that Celestalon tweeted a few days ago, like, I just saw the first look at some new thing that some people are going to be very, very excited about, which certainly felt like a tease for some kind of Hearthstone feature, like maybe a tournament mode that would be well received and hyped. Maybe this is pointing towards something massive here being done. I feel like when I say that, people think I know something. I don't know anything. I don't know anything. I'm not hinting at anything. Oh, that's a Marvel Snap question. How did location idea come up? Robitussin might be in chat, by the way. I feel like they were here earlier. The first iteration was technically Barons. We tested champions that were minions with activatable effects. That actually sounds really sick. That sounds like that's commanders, right? That's commanders in Magic the Gathering, basically. I think I would like that more than locations, to be honest, but maybe they'll go back to it. Tried to get an AV and Sunken City and ended up with objectives. Then we finally decided to do a new card type in Castle Nathria officially. For many months, locations took up 2 spaces on the board and had a socket that you would put a minion into. Locations were only active when they had a minion in them, and they would lose durability when the minion died. It was cool, but it was really difficult to do thing. Yeah, that sounds a little too complex, to be honest. I like the idea of somebody occupying the location, though. That's pretty cool. Top decking a location with no minions in hand just felt awful. They looked pretty cool, though. Would love to do something with that tech someday. Wow, so they actually had this like fully built out, it sounds like. That's kind of, I mean, that's a neat idea. I want like mechs using that tech. Like you can put a minion inside a mecha suit of some kind, you know, like a shredder suit, and the location is the shredder suit, and you plop the minion down as the pilot. That's how you use that tech, Cora. Give me, I want mechas in Hearthstone. That would be sick. Here's a question about undead and new tribes. Some of these I read earlier, so I'm kind of, you know, skipping the details. Undead aren't really a Revendreth thing, so not fitting for Castlnathria. We're definitely for the idea of adding more tribes, though. Just have to get an expansion theme that warrants it. He has answered this question about 25 times, and it's always about undead. So this really every time makes me think, okay, we're going to get Death Knights. We're going to get undead. This is all a tease. Obviously, I have no reason to believe that. Purely speculation. But every single time I think, okay, third expansion of the year is Death Knights. Undead is a new minion type. Okay, here's a question about hand revealing. Example, a 3-mana 4/4 that has the drawback of revealing the leftmost card in your hand while in play. Hand revealing is more interesting as a concept than it is in practice. Having unknowns is good. If you know what your opponent can do, it usually means you have less interesting choices to make. I actually agree with that. I think a lot of the fun in card games is the tension built from not knowing what your opponent has, and the both like strategic upside of that, like, okay, you know, what are the odds that this exists versus this exists? How likely do they have this? There's some soft math that typically happens there, but also it's just surprising. It's fun. That oh my god, do they have it? Do they have it? Do they have it? That is what makes card games so fun in many cases. So I like the fact that there are still surprises. I don't think everybody knowing all the cards all the time. Playing face up would not be nearly as fun. It's part of the reason I think esports isn't that enjoyable to people anymore. I think people prefer watching streams where you go, oh my god, is Regis going to get owned? Do they have the answer? Do they have the flame strike? Do they have the twisting nether? Whatever. Whereas in esports, you go, oh, he's got the twisting nether. That's not going to work. You know, it loses a lot of the surprise and that fun tension that exists for Hearthstone esports. I wonder if Hearthstone esports would do better if they hid the opponent's hand. You know, they always talk about caster bias, like they talk about plays and decisions with knowledge of the opponent's hand, which I think Hearthstone casters do a great job of keeping that in mind. This is not a slight against them or anything. Much better than I would ever do. But it still might just be nice if they didn't have that knowledge, right? Considering plays as the player would consider them, living vicariously essentially through plays, I think might be more fun. All right, this is a topic that's come up a few times recently. Been looking at the definition of discover, and it says about adding a card to hand, but that's not always strictly what happens. Choose one of 3 cards to add to your hand is the keyword text for discover. Iksar says, Hearthstone rules have always been more about best words to help players understand versus exactly correct in all circumstances. I think this text gets discover across even if it doesn't represent the exact definition across all card interactions. And I think people who are really entrenched card game players have a harder time with this than, say, like I do. This has never bothered me. Like the card that got revealed today, you know, kidnap or whatever, doesn't explain what it does at all. You have to learn it. You have to see it in action to know this card today. The kidnapper's sack has a death rattle that returns it to their hand. Nothing about the card text tells you that, right? You have to see it to learn it, you know. That's never bothered me. I think people who come from card games where there's mountains of text on cards want everything to be fully understood and fully written out and fully covered. You know, different preferences, I guess. Now, I will say, Discover has never actually followed these rules. I was thinking about this today in preparation for this discussion. This card came out with Discover. This was literally the first expansion, the League of Explorers with Discover, right? Sir Finley Murgleton is as old as Discover cards can be. It doesn't even follow the rules. You don't add the hero power to your hands. You know what I mean? Like it's not like some new trend they're breaking. It's literally never been right. Choose one of 3 cards to add to your hand. This does not do that. This does not do that. It never has. Discover has never meant that. So I don't know. I feel like the expectations for the keyword were set up a long time ago. I will also note that the reason I think Discover confuses a lot of people, I think if we look at like, this is a good example, Drakefire Amulet, right? Discover 2 dragons. So like a lot of people think or thought when this was first revealed that you would both get the dragons on board and get the dragons in hands. Because Discover says choose one of 3 cards to add to your hand. So you get the 2 dragons in hand. But what happens is a lot of these Discover effects intercept the cards, basically. So you discover the 2 dragons, but instead of adding them to your hand, you're summoning them. The card text is intercepting them before they get to your hand and doing something with them instead, right? So that's why you don't get things with Discover. If it tells you what's happening to the cards, then you don't necessarily get them. right? And there are actually a ton of examples like this as well if we look through, right? Same thing with this new card, Nightshade Bud, right? Discover a minion from your deck to summon. It intercepts it before it gets to your hand, and it summons it or casts it before it gets there. So if they have that kind of follow-up text to tell you what's happening with the card you just discovered, then it doesn't get added to your hand. If they don't have that follow-up text, it's probably going to your hand, right? Just a little thoughts on Discover. This conversation came up a few weeks ago, so I was primed and ready to talk about this one. How excited are you for the next expansion? How far ahead of you guys are on sets right now? Furthest in the future sets we're working on in some capacity are the first two expansions of 2024. No card design work is done, but we're exploring what a 2-set narrative could look like. So, you know, we had these like 3-set narratives in the past with Reform and the League of Explorers, Rise of Shadows here. Talk to the WoW team about possibly doing a canon universe thing, but very early. I don't know. Sounds insane. I don't know. I'm cool with weird new stuff. I can't even begin to imagine what that means exactly, but I love it. Connecting the storylines between the two would be awesome. This early on, the first thing we think of has a less than 10% chance of being the thing we actually do. We're just starting on some interesting narrative ideas very early. Also, I'm excited for the next expansion. So we're taking stock of what players love and want us to improve and make sure we're spending our time there. There isn't any major revelation here, but looking at things like the monthly card back and asking if that artist time is better spent making something else. Is the monthly card back going away? That would be a surprise. Seems like people like that a lot. Seems like a reason to log in. I don't know. That would really shock me. There's a lot more disruption than we're used to seeing in the upcoming set. Does this indicate a larger shift in design philosophy, or was this purely in reaction to Stormwind? Team is generally more pro-risk than we have been in the past, accepting of more complexity and more high emotion cards, even if sometimes those emotions are negative. We've learned more in the last year or two of card design that we did in the many years previous as a result than we did, I guess. We'll probably skew more towards less complexity, but I feel like disruption has been more welcome than I first imagined. We'll probably keep printing, maybe just not at an Elucia level of power. Yeah, I like disruption, honestly. I like Hearthstone when it is not a predetermined outcome. I want to be surprised in games. I want games to play out differently, and I feel like disruption often encourages that in metas. Now, at an individual game level, of course, if you Mutanus the request reward, obviously that means the game always ends when you Mutanus the request reward, and that may feel like the same outcomes. But if enough of that exists, people don't play quests, right? Right? People play decks that aren't reliant on a single win condition, that aren't reliant on a single card combo. So it has this greater, wider meta impact of opening up what decks people are willing to play. And people have more open-ended decks because of that disruption, right? So it may seem like disruption is limiting on an individual basis, on a really micro level, but I think on the macro meta level, disruption actually makes people play a lot of different stuff. It opens up lines, and each deck has multiple paths to victory, which therefore makes games feel a lot different a lot of the time, which for me is how I like playing Hearthstone. So for people who really, really like playing the same exact thing every time and want to have the quest reward every time and want to win with their exact same combo every game, it probably feels a lot worse because they can't play those kinds of decks. That's a valid belief. It's just different than the one I have. I like open-ended crazy outcomes. I want every game to end a little differently, you know. But oh yeah, here we teased this one a little earlier. That didn't really. This just came up organically. I'm not trying to stir up anything here, but this was teased earlier in the stream as a particularly spicy tweet that created some stirred things up a little bit. Pretty fun as always. Thank you guys for jumping in on Inside. Sorry I didn't read a lot of chat. It's really hard to bounce back and forth and stay focused, so I kind of tried to lean into the AMAs. You guys are there for YouTube to enjoy.